Welcome students. In this extra video lesson I will be discussing about the socio-historical and literary background of Chaucer, the context in which Chaucer was writing. So we will be talking about a lot of things apart from Wife of Bath's prologue as well. So as we all know, courtly French romance or those works that related to the Arthurian legends, the legends of King Arthur, courtly French romance, they had as their primary topics, primary topics of writing, honor and feudal notions of service, feudal notions of honor, of chivalry, sometimes combined with Christian virtues. So when these came into the tradition, English tradition, rendered into the English language, much of the courtliness was lost. And what was more interesting or interest grew around the physical adventures of which Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, even The Wife of Bath's Tale is a part of. The pilgrimage, the journey of pilgrimage is a physical adventure. And not all French romance যখন বলছি আর কি, not all French allegories or narratives were polite. But from France, the English literature, the English tradition adopted a short narrative poem, a type of a short narrative poem. Is often realistic, coarse, that is very much crude in its nature, no sugar coating, no extra ornamentation of language, to the point, and coarse in writing, sometimes verging on vulgarism, humorous. This short narrative poem, it came to be known as the fabulum. And the fabulum was mostly associated, this sort of a narrative poem, this is mostly associated to the middle class, the middle classes, who slowly grew in importance as a result of the feudal system. As the feudal system came to decay, feudal system, that is the rule of the land owning class, keeping of serfs, keeping of the lower classes of people as unpaid laborers, almost as slaves, aristocratic rule, the feudal mechanism of government, as it came to an end, the middle class came to rise. As the feudal class began to decay, fabulum is thus then becomes the product of a class, mostly continued by the middle class. Therefore, fabulum, which is a product of this class was about to destroy feudalism. They were mostly the middle class people, they were mostly immigrants, from other lands, who came and settled upon the European lands, and they started small businesses on their own. The middle class was primarily the merchant class. They started businesses of their own, thereby generating capital of their own without acquiring taxes, therefore destroying the entire system of governance that feudalism followed and that feudalism promoted or propagated. The development of a money economy, that is the middle class and the merchant class, the development of money economy out of natural economy, Feudalism was based on natural economy, land that is to be tilled, therefore to be paid for, etc. So this was the economy of money. This was the economy of nature. It was hastened, that is quickened both by the coming of different kinds of feudal service to money payments, and the growth of towns with their trading communities gradually took away the very basis of the feudal system by encouraging the growth of a class which had no place in it. So basically the middle class were mostly concerned with trading, traders, merchants. Remember, the wife of Bath is also a part of this class. She's a trader, she's a merchant, she's a capitalist weaver. So she belongs to this rising middle class that was slowly overthrowing feudalism as a government, as a governing regime. This new class, town dwellers, they were town dwellers. They lived in towns, small cities, that is like Bath, carried on commercial activity of one kind or another. Traders and artisans who no longer lived on the land, but who obtained their food and their raw materials by selling to the peasants the goods they manufactured, were less impressed by courtly notions of love and honor than the more conservative feudal landowners. That is, the wife of Bath, or this class of which the wife of Bath is a representative, they were town dwellers, carried out commercial activities, belonged to trading communities. Traders, artisans, they no longer lived on the land. They were travelers. They traveled from one places to another, like the wife of Bath did, for various purposes. It may be on pilgrimage purposes, it may be the purpose of business also. They were traders and artisans, and they obtained their food and raw materials by selling to peasants, sold their merchandise to peasants, therefore bringing the peasants into the economy of exchange as well. They were less interested in courtly notions of love, honor, chivalry, etc., which was a characteristic trait of the feudal lords. This middle class, they were completely opposed to this likeness. They were more akin, or they were more closer to, they were more impressed by the realistic, iconoclastic, priding themselves on knowing life as it really is. They were very realistic and true to their core. This is basically nothing but the advent of, the entertaining genre of all sorts of art that exists for the masses of people. The rise of the middle class was nothing but the rise of the working class, a class which has not yet proliferated, which has not yet grown in quantity, grown in stature. Therefore, it still has a very strong hold over the community, because the most dominant class of the feudal lords, they were dying away. This was the rising class, so they were the dominating class. They would become the dominating class slowly into the future, as this middle classes, they acquired more and more capital. They promoted themselves to the capitalist class, and then that class created another working class which never grew to the stature of the middle class that you see on your screen. The capitalist class always suppressed the working classes, who would never grow up the social ladder, which these middle classes, which the early middle class did. And the wife of Bath is also a part of it. She is also not impressed by the older conventions of courtly chivalry, of old conventions of tradition and morals and moralistic rituals and customs. They knew life was hard, and of course life was hard for Alison, being married off at the age of 12 and being hit by husbands. It is and a society which does not accept women as earners. She becomes a businesswoman. She makes herself acceptable to the society through various means which she sees fit according to her own subjective ideas. And so this rise of the middle class was also an important feature in the characterization of wife of Bath. And this class, they sponsored or they promoted a satirical kind of narrative, which was, as it were, the antitype of the idealizing vision of courtly knight or a pious churchman. So the middle class, they were more interested, and Chaucer is also a part of this class. Remember, we will learn about that, we will just hear about that a little bit later. So Chaucer being a part of this class, the characters that he draws, representatives of the society in which he is living, the characters, they are also a part of this class. So this entire class, they promoted a sort of literature that was satirical in nature. It was satirical kind of a narrative, full of satire and irony. The very antitype, the very opposite of the idealizing vision of courtly knight, like in Arthurian legends, like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, who undertakes a quest for the sake of honor only and nothing else. So the middle class, they were completely against those sorts of narratives, the literature that they promoted and produced thereof, it was also completely antitype or antithetical or opposite to the idealizing vision of the courtly romances, of courtly knighthood, or the pious or the very religious churchman. And therefore we have clergymen in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales who are actually corrupted, who take bribes, like that. This middle class challenge of the knightly ideal, the challenge to the knightly ideal was one of the most important phases, one of the significant phase of history of European culture. Historically speaking, the heroic age, when we were reading, Anglo-Saxon literature, Beowulf, etc., all these things, the Battle of Brunanburg, etc., etc., the heroic age, which was reflected in the Germanic epics, which you have read in the previous semester, they had given rise to the feudal age with its own concept of hero. That is feudalism. That is feudalism. It had its own concept of a hero. when a more commercial society develops, that is this middle class, mercantile and trading class, when a more commercial society develops, the whole possibility of heroism in this modern world is re-examined. Re-examination of the what is a heroic, what is heroism, এই যে কনসেপ্টটাই পুরো কোয়েশ্চেন হয়ে গেল with the new society, with the modern society, with the rise of the middle class and the fall of the feudal classes or feudalism. And therefore we have Don Quixote, Cervantes, written by Cervantes. Just a moment. Best example being Don Quixote. He's a foolish knight, but also sensible. But also sensible and somewhat charming. And this Don Quixote then develops this foolish hero, re-examined idea of hero. This develops later on at a very later stage. মানে if Cervantes যদি আর কি early 17th century-তে হয়, তাহলে in the early 18th century we have Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, a capitalist hero, যে কিনা আইল্যান্ডে স্ট্র্যান্ডেড হয়ে গিয়েও according to his businessman mentality is carrying out activities on a stranded island, in which he is stranded. So the idea of the hero is more developed, the commercial status being developed more and more through history as society is moving towards capitalism. Literature reflects just that development. And then another development of the novel takes place slowly as the novel as a genre, as a mode of writing, it develops. We also have Henry Fielding's novels. এটা হলো ওই early 19th century-তে Henry Fielding's novels. We have Thackeray's novels, all in the early 19th century, where prudential morality, that is morality on which you take pride on without questioning it, in these works we see that the prudential sort of morality is challenged. So the idea of the hero, it develops slowly. And this idea, the fate of the hero in English literature will develop further as various modes of writing also develop. But the form of the fableau with which we began this lecture, this fableau, this was a very important step towards this change, towards the development of heroic idealism. And one of the finest examples of this being, of the fableau being, Chaucer's, let's change the color, very prominent example in context, মানে আমাদের কনটেক্সটে আমাদের প্রসঙ্গে, Chaucer's The Pardoner's Tale. This is also an example. Fableau which were found in France in the 12th and 13th centuries. Before the 1400s, it was very rare in England. Many types. Stories of town life, about indecency, indecent stories of time life, that is. Humorous, satiric tales of intrigue, of interest, sexual intrigue. Animal stories. Chaucer's Pardoner's Tale, a moralized tale of, enlivening of sermons, how sermons should be developed and given more life while preaching it. Pardoner's Tale is an example of that. And in such sort of narrative, like the Pardoner's Tale, such as, which talks about enlivening or, changing or modulating the sermons that are preached in churches in order to make them more attractive, in order to make them more educational for the listeners, for the people who are going to the church goers. They were not very much liked by the clergy. The clergy themselves never liked the genre of the fabulum. And Chaucer, the clergy, they were also the protectors of literature, because literature were the guardians. Primary forms of literature that were produced before the Middle Ages were mostly of the religious type. They were religious propaganda, religious sermons were printed, religious texts were translated, and all fictions and all tales had a religious significance. And the clergy, they were the protectors of the most sturdy protectors of this moralized form of the written word throughout the Middle Ages. But we find them again in Chaucer, who puts stories of this kind in the mouths of the merchant. Even in the Merchant's Tale, we find a fabulum which satirizes or causes an intriguing atmosphere around the heroic tale, around the tale of the hero, what the hero implies, what heroism implies, how they are reversed, how they are corrupted according to the various usages, etc., etc. We find in the tale of the miller, we find in the tale of the reeve, another clergy person, of the shipman, and also the summoner. Chaucer's contribution to the development of literature is already evident over here. Another form of popular medieval literary form. Now we are locating Chaucer in the literary background over here. So I'm talking about the development of literature in the Middle Ages alongside the social developments, that is, rising of social classes and their prominence, their flourishing, and making it necessary for any writer to represent the development. And this is the class that Chaucer represents. This is the culture of intermingling of classes, the multicultural aspect of medieval England that was slowly coming to the forefront. That is what Chaucer represents, the transition. So another popular medieval literary form. So I will just zoom out of this screen so that you can have, you can just look over it in totality. Yes. So this is the first form that we discussed. Now we come to the second form. The second form being the fable. So those of you who were thinking that the fabulum is the fable, then Now it is clear that it is not. Fable is a different literary form of medieval England, popular form in most ages and civilizations. The fable came to the Middle Ages from both Greek and Indian sources. From both Greek and Indian sources. It is a short story in which animals, acting more or less as human beings, behave in such a way as to illustrate a simple model. Greatest example for us being a very, very common and a very popular example. Let's try this pen. Popular example being Aesop's fables. All of us have read it. All of us have a copy, a tattered copy of this book at home. I would like to think this is a very popular collection, Aesop's fable. So it is, as I was saying, a story in which animals acting more or less as human beings behave in such a way as to illustrate a simple model. That is a fable thing. Beast tales, therefore, fable is a form of beast tale. See, each and everything that I will be mentioning is connected to Chaucer, so do not overlook any point. So beast tales. Beast tales represent a very widespread kind of popular literature, and the fable develops out of the beast tale. That is, from the beast tales, the form of fable has developed. Fable develops out of the beast tale in much the same way as fabulum has a branch out of an exemplum. From the fabulum they have developed another form of writing called the exemplum. নামটা যেরকম মানেটাও ঠিক, to set an example, and therefore the Pardoner's Tale is a fabulum that talks about town dwellers and all. It sets an example of life. It sets an example for the standard of life. Therefore, so we have the fable also as a outer or an external development of beast tales. In spite of its popularity, in spite of the fable's popularity in Middle English, in the medieval England, especially in the 12th and 13th centuries, no Middle English collection of fables exist. Books of fables in French and Latin survive, but there are only a handful of extant English fables from before Chaucer. And beast tales were adopted. Why would they say important? They were adapted for satirical purposes. Again, therefore, a component of the according to the interest of the middle class, which we discussed before. They were satirical purposes. By having animals act as men, it was easy to satirize human follies and vices, of course. The presentation of men as animals being itself an implicit criticism. Presentation of men as animals, that presentation itself is a criticism of human nature, of what we call quote unquote humanity. So the presentation of men as animals being itself an implicit criticism of man's claim to superiority over brutes. According to the Darwinian chain of being, human beings range at the top of the human chain over beasts and other non-speaking creatures. So by presenting men as animals in these genre of the beast tale of fable, the writer being literature being a mirror of the society, the writer is then itself at that very point of presenting men as animals is criticizing humanity, questioning the superior position, the so-called superior position of human beings. These stories about animals varied considerably in tone. There were various uh, objectives and various moral messages hidden in fables, and a whole series of beast stories developed with a character around the character of Reynard. The fox being usually an animal usually characterized with cunningness and hidden talent for pulling one over you, a very cunning and a clever creature that is. So a whole cycle of these tales and fables developed around the myth or around the story of a character of the reign of Reynard, who is a fox, as the principal hero or oftentimes a villain. The most popular collection of fables surrounding this character being the French collection, the French Roman de Renard, simply meaning romance of Renard. Romance in the French sense means journeys of various, giving out various moral stories and moral outlooks. So this is a collection that has survived basically. And only 3 Middle English representatives of this cycle of beast fables, beast epic, English beast fables, three representative Middle English texts are only 3 are present, called beast epic. We call them beast epics, and one of them again is of Chaucer's Nonnes Pristes Tellus. That is the Latin pronunciation or writing. Nonnes Pristes Tellus, or Nun's Priest's Tale. If you have the time, read Nun's Priest's Tale. It is hugely funny and satirical and very, very interesting piece of poem that you will come across. It is a conversation that takes place between a cock and a hen, cock's name being Chanticleer and the hen's name being Partlet or Pertilotte. So just go through the poem, see their conversations. It's very, very interesting, perhaps more interesting than any modern works, given the context, the satire, the message that it implies, the irony that is hidden within the conversation. So Chaucer again here stands as a representative author of another developmental phase of Middle English period, representing the follies and the vices of human beings. That is what he exactly does in all of the tales of his Canterbury Tales, in all of the tales that he gives his pilgrims. He presents to us, the readers, the variety of vices, the various degrees of follies that human beings were capable of, in a satiric tone, along with representing the changing notions, the changing ideals, the changing conventions, what is considered to be the normal, which was changing, which was in transition during the Middle English period. Chaucer was also catching the spirit of the change in his work, of which Wife of Bath's Tale is one of the profoundest examples. Wife of Bath's Tale is also sub part. It forms a little part under the category of a beast fable, because the Wife of Bath gives an elaborate example of the lion. As I was just going to say that uh, the coarse satirical tone of so many of these animal stories cannot have made them welcome in monastic libraries. As I was saying, that clergies were the protectors of the written word. So the libraries were owned by monasteries and the clergymen and the church. And these beast fables were definitely not allowed to be stored in the monastic libraries. And and in Middle English bestiary, we shall call it the tradition of Middle English. I am writing it in short, I am abbreviating it. That does not mean that you can do it, never do it. There will be a straight cross on any abbreviations if you put them in your answer. So, as I was saying, Middle English bestiary, or the tradition of writing beast epics and beast tales in fables. Middle English bestiary. Lion, eagle, adder. Adder is a kind of a snake. Ant, hart, a kind of a rabbit. Fox, of course, fox. Spider, mermaid, elephant, turtle dove, এক ধরনের ডভ আর কি, এক ধরনের পায়রা, টার্টল ডভ, প্যান্থার, they are dealt with in with varying degrees. These are the beasts that have been alluded to in the various forms of Middle English bestiary that still exists. So the bestiary, it is a series of accounts of animals, of their qualities, and of legends associated with them. That is why the Wife of Bath invokes the story of the lion, a legend that is associated with the story of the lion that she invokes. We will talk about it when we get there. Just remember it. And with the model application, the bestiary, the beast fables, they had a model application made at the end. And all of these developments, we find the culmination of Middle English literature in the works of Geoffrey Chaucer. The culmination of the developments in Middle English, in the Middle English historical literary period, we find the culmination of the developments with the coming of Geoffrey Chaucer. This is the age period, একদম correctly accurately জানা নেই, but somewhat 1340s. He was born and died in 1400. The way with which he handled English, the language, that put him in the forefront along the lines of the most famous French writers or Italian writers. Literature of the French and the Italians, they were more popular than English at this point of time. But with Chaucer, his craftsmanship over the language and the way that he used to write, it put English language on the same parameters, or English writing literature on the same parameters of the French and the Italian. He had the European consciousness. The the European consciousness, and this enabled him to render in English the dominant themes and attitudes of European literature, and at the same time the English national consciousness, to allow him to present the English scene as it had never been presented before, along with English national consciousness. Which, as I was saying, aided in him being the most appropriate person to represent the changing culture. He had the relaxed and quizzical attitude, curious attitude that let him contemplates the various contemplates the varieties of human nature, combining sympathy, irony, amusement, together with the advantage that Chaucer had, the advantage of knowing men in all ranks of the society. Now, what basically this is that the concern with human nature presented in the variety of forms as it existed in varied degrees. This was a result of something, that a phenomenon that we can call anthropocentrism, that is centered around the human subject, as opposed to theocentrism, that is centered around theological concepts of religion, God, belief and faith. So Chaucer, or the Middle English, concerned with human nature and the representation of its varied degrees, is basically a part of the phenomenon of anthropocentrism towards which society and its literature and its culture was slowly shifting. So as I was saying, continuing with that, Chaucer had the opportunity to know men in all ranks of the society. He was trained in the courtly life, the diplomatic life, and the urban life of affairs. His visits to France and Italy on government service gave him an opportunity of coming into direct contact with French and Italian men of letters, and that of course enriched and added on to his knowledge of the literature of those countries. In fact, he was fitted by both natural genius and the circumstances of his life. তো প্রতিভাও ছিল প্লাস পরিস্থিতির কারণে অনেক কিছু সে শিখেছে, to become the most technically accomplished, the most widely ranging and the most universally appealing of medieval English writers, and indeed one of the most skillful and attractive also. With Chaucer, English language and English literature grew up. It grew up. A gradual process of recovery and refinement which the English language had been undergoing since it emerged after the conquest, after the Norman conquest, in rough popular renderings in the French and Latin languages and French romances, eh, that it was a happy accident that Chaucer was the man who had the technical brilliance of, technical handling, that is the technical part of writing, metrical meters and foots and etc. Chaucer had that knowledge, as well as the breadth of view of the knowledge, the interests, the experiences of life, the largeness and sympathy that enabled him in the latter part of his career, of which the Canterbury Tales is a product. All of this, the natural talent that he had, the natural ability to handle technicalities of writing, metrical handling, that is, and according to the circumstances in his life, the fact that he was exposed to so many various strata of the society, had first hand experience with them, his view of life was also quite enlarged, as opposed to other people who were not circumstantially exposed to the wider society, to the wider world per se. So this made him, towards the later part of the career, of which the Canterbury Tales is a part of, is a product of, he became the embodiment. Chaucer comes to embody his great secular vision of his fellow men, combining intellectual and imaginative resources of the Middle Ages. That is why Canterbury Tales is a secular story. The fact that it represents the various cultures, the various classes, that various characters stand as representatives of the secular vision of his fellow men, and they are all a secular place or a secular space means that the varieties, the diversity would not hinder when it comes to collective consciousness, and therefore people from all stands of life, they are carrying out a particular journey, one single journey, to the shrine of Becket, Saint Becket. That is what that is what secularity is, tolerance. And thinking it like that, the Canterbury Tales is nothing but this manifestation, coming into actuality, coming into reality, this secular vision of humanity that Chaucer had. Unlike Dante, who also did a similar thing, but presented a great concrete embodiment of moral and theological universe. But Chaucer brought alive with vividness, cunningness, the psychological and social world of his time. Which psychological and social world of his time, which quite ironically is the world of every time. সব সময়ই আর কি এরকম কিছু কিছু আমরা কিছু রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভ চরিত্র আমাদের জীবনে খুঁজে পাই। আর সত্যি কথা বলতে গেলে দ্য প্রেজেন্টেড টাইপস অফ চসার, তার থেকে বাইরে খুব কমই রকমের চরিত্র বা খুব কমই রকমের চরিত্রের আসল মানুষও থাকে। ওই জন্যই স্যামুয়েল জনসন হ্যাড that this is what had prompted Johnson to say that here lies God's plenty, the abundance of God's creation. Everything we can find, everything can be found, can be gleaned out from Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. So influenced by mostly French love poetry, Chaucer grew his, you know, his spectrum of sight. He grew his vision, that is, it expanded his vision, expanded his exposure. And being a bourgeois, being a middle class with courtly connections, he had the freedom of both the worlds, the bourgeois, the middle class, and also the administrative, the courtly class, the aristocratic class. And having the freedom of at least two social worlds brought him into contact with people of all ranks and professions, to provide increasing opportunities for the clear-eyed observations of the men that we also find in the Canterbury Tales. And since he was initially influenced by the French courtly romance, such as those of a French writer called Guillaume de Machaut, a French courtly romance. This is the name of a person. He was influenced by him. Chaucer was also influenced by a very popular French courtly text, love poem, that is Roman de la Rose, or Romance of the Rose, which he partly translated also. Chaucer was thus brought up on the French courtly romance tradition, and on later French developments of it, before he moved on to more serious Italian poetry. The ritual dance of an idealized courtly life, with its emphasis on idealized courtly life, যেটা আমরা ওই শেক্সপিয়ার পড়ার সময়ও পড়ছিলাম পেট্রার্কের কনটেক্সটে, that idealized courtly life that Petrarch represented in his poems of unrequited love. So here also this idealized courtly life, with its huge emphasis on gentleness, or gentleness and franchise, meaning nobility and generosity of character. Nobility and generosity of character. Slowly, Chaucer transcends these qualities. Idealized courtly life with emphasis on gentleness and franchise gives way to a larger concern with the fundamentals of human character. That is, from the traditional influences that he has had, he moves on to larger concern with the fundamentals of human character and behavior, and of course, which eventually leads to, when we concern ourselves with human character and behavior, it eventually leads to contemplation. This is Chaucer's development, the development of Chaucer's outlook. Toward literature and its purpose. That from thinking that literature should be a representation of generosity and character, he moves on to the larger concern with the fundamentals of human character and behavior, before eventually going into contemplation Contemplation of what? Human character যখন আমরা ভাববো তখন what will we contemplate on? Contemplation on the vices, vanities, foibles, that is follies, villainies, vitality, color, vigor, virtues. This is what he contemplates on. Christian ideals of virtue and a robust acceptance of human weakness, that human beings are fallible, that the acceptance of this truth, Christian ideals of virtue and the robust acceptance of human weakness and the absurdity in the fabulou tradition, absurdity that is presented through irony and satire. This is typical of Chaucer and of the civilization for which he spoke. Chaucer is 14th century, and his work gives us a vivid insight into the 14th century world. And therefore, Chaucer goes on to write. He goes on to write the Book of the Duchess, where we find the life of a common man being given more importance than to the death of the Duchess, along with various other themes. He goes on to write the House of Fame, you can read the summaries of these works just to get an idea of what he is writing, how he is challenging the established tradition and creating a newer anthropocentric literature. So he writes the House of Fame, he writes the Parliament of Fowls, Parliament of Crows, that is, it itself is a satirical, the title itself points us to the satire that must be included in the text. He writes Troilus and Cressade, probably written in 1380s, probably written in the 1380s. And through these works, particularly from the Parliament of Fowls, in which Chaucer acknowledges the two sources of knowledge to be experience and authority. এটা নিয়ে অনেক আলোচনা করা যায়, বাট এখন আমি করছি না. সো পার্লামেন্ট অফ ফাউলসে we get to see Chaucer establishing the fact that he can gather knowledge only from these two sources, that is experience and authority. And in a certain context that he says he himself knows about love not from experience but from old books, that is from authoritative old books that act as an authority. And experience and auctority in Chaucer's term, these are the two sources of knowledge and understanding. For the wife of Bath also begins her tale by saying that experience, though not authority, were in this world is right enough for me. Authority being well established authoritative information, cultural information, which challenges your experience. Wife of Bath reverses this role. She says that experience is enough for me to gather knowledge. I know of no authority which has given me any knowledge, because being a woman, she has had no authority hitherto up till now. It is only through experience with which she gathers a worldview, with which she collects a philosophy of life, with which she operates herself. And a culmination of both of these two sources of knowledge we can also find in Troilus and Cresside, where he creates a multi-dimensional, a multi-layered love story, intermingled with the story of Troy, that we already know. And here he combines both his experience of observation of various kinds and various types of human beings, and also uses his wide reading, the fact that he has read so much. So both experience and authority works and culminates in Troilus and Cresside. He goes on to write the legend of good women, where he presents the stories of loving and faithful women, something that he had not maintained in his previous works, and he wanted to rectify with this work. Therefore, he tried to present loving and faithful women in the legend of good women. And then, of course, the project at hand that we have, the Canterbury Tales. His unfinished magnum opus. This is the perfect wedding, the perfect combination of that authority and experience that we see, that we have seen, Chaucer have tried to compensate in various of previous works, but perfect culmination comes in the Canterbury Tales. Perfect wedding of authority and experience, of books and life. And he throws them over a collection of true to life, that is lifelike characters of pilgrims that are drawn or brought from every class of contemporary Englishmen, who while they are traveling, and while they are spending hours of journeying, tell tales drawn from whatever literary or folk culture source seems most appropriate to the individual character. So that is, Chaucer takes the liberty of drawing characters from each and every class of contemporary England, and gives each and every character a story that is being drawn from whatever possible sources, from beast fables to cultural iconic texts, to personal observation stories, to personal narrative stories, from historical tales to anything. The characters are talking about anything and everything. They are giving a story. They are telling us tales. Of course, the Canterbury Tales did have certain predecessors in the like of similar literature, such as Giovanni Sircambie, novel such as Boccaccio's just remove it. Boccaccio's Decameron. Boccaccio had adopted the wife of prologue to the wife of Bath tales in his Decameron. We will try to accommodate scenes of the movie in our classes later on, not now. These were very obvious sources, and therefore we have various fragments of tales of various people belonging to variety of classes of the society of contemporary England, one of the fragment containing the wife of Bath's prologue and tale, the friar's tale and the summoner's tale. These are what the wife of Bath's prologue and tale, the friar's tale and the summoner's tale, these are what we would group into a category called the marriage group of tales, because these tales, these three tales, they revolve around a certain story of marriage, or revolve around the concept of marriage as an institution of the society, particularly marriage group of tales. The wider group to which the wife of Bath's prologue and tale belongs. The character that is the wife of Bath's tale, the friar's tale. The friar will actually interrupt the wife of Bath. আমরা পড়বো ওই পোর্শনটা পরের ক্লাসে. The summoner's tale. The wife of Bath's prologue is one of the high points of the Canterbury Tales. The character creates herself as she talks. মানে আমরা ওর চরিত্রের ব্যাপারে ওর বলার সাথে সাথেই বুঝতে পারছি, বিকজ শি ইজ টকিং অ্যাবাউট হারসেলফ, রিমেম্বার দ্যাট. সো her characterization happens, occurs or surfaces as she speaks, with nothing else, with nobody else's comments. She's strong-willed, the wife of Bath, just a moment. The wife of Bath is strong-willed, that is, she's a very determinant woman. She's opinionated, she's learned, experienced, and therefore has opinions, of course. She's opinionated, she's sexual, highly sexual, she's frank, very candid in nature, she's humorous, and she's also masterful. She's not gullible. She's a very opinionated, strong-willed and masterful character. Her account of her 5 husbands, her defense of human frailty, and arguments against chastity as a practicable ideal. Chastity, the concept of virgin woman being chaste and pure, this concept she challenges vehemently. So all of these arguments that she presents. Just a moment. As I was saying, 5 husbands, her defense of human frailty, and her arguments against, chastity. The concept of chastity, the concept of virginity, giving purity to a woman. So if you are not a virgin, you are impure, you are unchaste. The gusto, that is the bravado that she shows, the vigor that she shows, and the fact that she relishes her position, her very advantageous and her very experienced position, that she loves it. She loves the fact, she loves the position that she now currently occupies after 5 husbands, after all the experience of these marriages. The fact that she has the strong-willed opinions, the learned opinions of, and challenges established conventions. She enjoys that position. She's a highly individualized character, and the first of a type that has seen many successors in English fiction. So she is the first of her type. আমরা এরকম চরিত্র অনেক খুঁজে পাই, কিন্তু the wife of Bath is the first of this type. In spite of her appeal to experience rather than authority, she can quote authorities with the best. She drops names, মানে বিশাল অনেক ক্রস রেফারেন্সেস দেয়, হিস্ট্রি বুকের একটা রেফারেন্স দেবে, ফিলসফি বইয়ের রেফারেন্স দেবে, clinical book reference দেবে. So she is not an illiterate. It is not just the man who can name drop. It is the woman who is name dropping. For the anti-feminist arguments which the wife puts into the mouth of one of her former husbands, as well as the aspects of the wife's own character, Chaucer drew on a great variety of sources. So, apart from Giovanni's this and this, it being sources of the entire Canterbury Tales, the Wife of Bath, the fact that many people will go on to say, many scholarships will establish that Chaucer was an anti-feminist, that the Wife of Bath is herself an anti-feminist. The tale is itself an anti-feminist tale. So these anti-feminist aspects Chaucer drew from various influences, various works, such as the Romance of the Rose, Romance of the Rose, just a moment, the Romance of the Rose, De Camp's Mirror of Marriage, you can understand the name. And two others, they have larger names, just for your information I'm giving you. Jerome's, you can go and look for the full names of the writers on internet. Jerome's Epistola Adversus, Joviana, and Walter Map's Valerius's letter to Rufinus, about not marrying a wife. Very interesting title. So of course this is an anti-feminist source for Chaucer. Valerius's letter to Rufinus about not marrying a wife. The Wife of Bath is concerned not only to defend the active use of sex in marriage, she is very much supportive of the fact that she can actually utilize her natural qualities, that is the fact that she is a woman, to an advantage. So she shows no shame in using sex, defending an active use of sex in marriage, and therefore she says, I'm just translating it on my own, I will bestow the flower of all mine age in the acts and in fruit of marriage. Of course, this is an allusion to her sexual organs. Acts and fruit of marriage is nothing but sex. So she defends an active use of sex in marriage, but also insists that married happiness is possible only if the husband yields, or only if the husband surrenders to the mastery of the wife. And her tale, based on a story found in both literary and folk tradition, is designed to prove her point. It is the story of the Wife of Bath, is the story of a tradition which falls under the tradition of the Loathly Lady. Her story falls under this umbrella tradition, Middle English tradition of the Loathly Lady, who turns out to be young and beautiful when the husband, whom she has acquired by doing him a service, which he has promised to repay in any way she asks, promises to put himself under her wise governance. So a loathly lady someone who, a trope, this is a trope, you can easily Google it, it's widely available on a quick Wikipedia study would do. I'm not divulging in details of the theme, of the motive, of the trope of the lonely lady. So it is a story of the lonely lady who turns out to be young and beautiful. When the husband whom she has acquired by doing him a task, she has acquired the husband by doing him a service, and this man has promised to repay in any way she asks. And this lonely lady acquires him as a husband and promises to put, and makes the husband promise her that he will be under her wise governance, not the man's. The tale is written in decasyllabic couplets. These are just a few technical information. Decasyllabic couplets combines magic with shrewd realism. We'll discuss about these. Shrewd realism and a certain sense of romance, certain sense of romantic delicacy, with which the poem concludes. This is perfectly in character for the wife of Bath, believed in love and romance, though on her own terms. ওই যে আমরা জেনারেল প্রোলগে যখন ওয়াইফ অফ বাথের পোর্শনটা লাস্ট ক্লাসে পড়লাম, that she knew a lot about the art of this old art of love. So she did believe in love and marriage. She was not a disbeliever in it, but she believed in it according to her own terms. So that is it for this class. This is a very in this lecture I have provided you with very important information and solid background of Chaucer and Chaucer's text. Make sure you watch it before the next class, and you can come to me with any questions and any problems, anything that you feel you want to ask or you want me to repeat. You're free to do that. Thank you very much. Bye bye.